What up, everybody? It's your man Chips. I'm back with my man Squirtle, and this time I got a special guest for you, my man Josh from Your Player 2.
Hey, I'm your player too, and if you go over to my YouTube channel, you will find a whole bunch of helpful content for gaming content creators and YouTubers, and then also a whole lot of video game content just like this. So, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
And right now we're gonna review Spider-Man Miles Morales. So if you don't know who Miles Morales is, you have to basically go back to Spider-Man 2018 to find out how he became Spider-Man, how he got his powers. Jumping forward to Spider-Man Miles Morales on both the PS4 and PS5, they give you an option to recap his story up until this point. And when you start the game, they immediately throw you into an action-packed sequence that's honestly, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say it's about, a 9. And it's a pretty great start to Miles' story because it shows you immediately that this game is going to focus on Miles while also giving some of the other characters in the Spider-Man universe some light.
It isn't a full-blown sequel to that game, but rather an expandalone in the vein of Uncharted Lost Legacy, meaning that it doesn't quite feature the same length as a proper sequel, but make no mistake, it is an incredibly well-crafted Spider-Man experience with a level of polish that games twice its length rarely manage to pull off.
Now let's talk about the graphics, because in this game, especially since it's a launch title for the PS5, you're hit with 4K 60. Yes, solid 60 frames of web swinging, web shooting, foot to mouth action of Spider-Man. And you gotta love it because they also give you two types of modes. They give you a performance mode and they give you a fidelity mode. As you can see, both are a little bit different. One still remains in 4K, but they changed the frame rate to 30. They include ray tracing and some other stuff that I don't really care about. The other mode is full 4K 60, and you know what? Even with this one, everything still looks beautiful.
And because you can't drop a buzzword like polish without talking about graphics, that's probably the best place we can start, given that Miles not only has to shoulder intense scrutiny as a follow-up to one of the greatest superhero games of all time, but also as a buffet of all of the graphical fidelity the ninth console generation has to offer. Artistically, you might assume that there wouldn't be much on offer here. Sure, we can rightly expect Miles will don a variety of different suits throughout his adventure, but how much can you really improve on a world that's already wowed people 2 years ago? The answer is by smartly setting it in an entirely different season, and then capitalize on the defining characteristics of that season with technical enhancements. Miles Morales takes place in the middle of winter, right at Christmas in fact, which, in my book, makes this the video game equivalent of settling in with a good viewing of Die Hard to kick off your holidays. While that's interesting in its own right, the city really comes alive once more, feeling both familiar and fresh. Seeing New York City draped in snow instantly distinguishes it from Insomniac's freshman outing. Not just because everything feels a little more festive as we close in on the holidays, but falling snow delicately collects on Miles' suit when he's not in motion, and a brilliant array of lighting scatters through and bounces off the fresh snowfall as you swing full tilt through the city skyline.
One thing that Insomniac decided to do was keep the foundations from Spider-Man 2018 into Spider-Man Miles Morales. What do I mean by that? The swinging mechanics, which are phenomenal, are still the same. In terms of the fighting, you can tell that there's a slight difference, just a slight difference, between Miles and Peter and how they fight. Granted, everything is pretty much flashy, acrobatic, well-known moves that Spider-Man does in both comics, movies, and anything you could think of. It's all in here. There's no saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because it's Miles, there's a little bit of flair to it. And it's definitely a much welcome change, and it makes you want to learn and perform the different combos just so that way you can keep up the flashiness of Miles.
After all, Miles and Peter have very similar abilities, and as a general rule, both characters more typically look after the Big Apple in their day-to-day than fight world-ending threats. And to be fair, Insomniac already had a rock-solid, familiar foundation from which to work with the 2018 Spider-Man's New York. But despite the familiar feel of Miles Morales, the story has zero problems breaking off in a new direction that is centered squarely where it needs to be, on Miles. I won't spoil any major narrative beats, but suffice it to say that Insomniac gets Peter out of Miles' way really, really quickly. I love this almost as much as I love the even approach with which they handled it. Obviously, the story should be primarily focused on our titular hero, but that they found a mutually respectful way to keep Peter and Miles connected throughout the narrative without it ever feeling like Miles is operating in Peter's shadow is beyond commendable. And I say this as someone who adores the MCU and whose top heroes have, since my childhood, remained Iron Man and Spider Man. But despite my love for those characters, even I can admit there were definitely moments or scenes where it felt like Peter couldn't stand on his own without Tony Stark in the MCU. Miles doesn't have to worry about this at all.
One of the biggest differences is that Spider-Man 2018, he was already a realized Spider-Man, fully fledged hero. He's been doing this for years. On the other hand, Miles, who's still a teenager, is learning to become his own version of Spider-Man, and he's also becoming his own person. Miles also has to face his own problems, so it's not necessarily just a continuation of Spider-Man 2018. Of course, it's in the same timeline, same universe. It takes place 1 year after the first one. But Miles has to face his own problems both as Miles and as Spider-Man. This is truly a coming-of-age story for a young Miles Morales into his own and to be recognized as his own Spider-Man. That's one of the biggest differences. Another big difference that I can truly appreciate is the abundance of representation. Now, Miles is black and Puerto Rican, and obviously he's moved from Brooklyn to Harlem, one of the neighborhoods that's actually well known for Hispanic culture and festivities and actually feeling alive. They do a phenomenal job with it. It's something that was needed, and I'm glad that Insomniac did it.
Miles stands confidently as a fully realized Spider-Man game, representing everything fans could want from a sequel. A solid backstory backed by stellar performances, a jaw-dropping world, and thoughtful design mechanics that are further refined to near perfection. Or, long story short, it's not just an incredible launch game, but a staggering example of thoughtful design in the medium. And that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on Spider-Man Miles Morales. Chipz, again, thank you so much for having me. It's been a whole lot of fun.
Make sure you hit that like button, you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any content coming from this channel. And also, I need you to go check out Josh's channel from Your Player 2. His link is in the description. Make sure you subscribe because he gives you helpful tips on becoming a better YouTuber and a better person. Catch you in the next one. Peace.